Strong looks different for each of us, and it's time to put focus on our unique journeys that get us there. This space, created weekly, is for athletes to improve their mindset in order to better navigate challenges that come up in sport and in different seasons of life. On this show, we ask the questions that lead to better answers and have the conversations that truly matter. This is the Becoming Your Strong podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Super freaking stoked to have you guys this week. I alluded to this in my previous episode that I have a stellar guest interview for today. For today, I have joining us from the Underdog Fitness Elite Podium Chasers team, Mr. Joe. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you.
I am too. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is that you are one of those people where I haven't had a ton of conversation with you yet, but the conversations that I have had with you have been so high quality. And just some of the words of wisdom that you've given, not only me, but people on this team has just been through the roof. And so I'm just ready for you to drop some knowledge, drop some nuggets for our listeners today. And the other thing I also really enjoy is that the first time that I met you was when you came out for an Underdog weekend.
Yep.
And you're like, I don't think I've ever done a DECA before. If I can remember correctly, you were just like, okay, Kevin, tell me what I'm doing. And I'm just going to go race it. And that to me is like, it takes a certain sort of human to do that. So just thrilled to have you on the podcast today, just to hear from you. But I want to give listeners the opportunity just to get to know you and just your background in hybrid racing and who you are in general. So I'll just let you take the mic and roll with it.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So I've been in, I'll call it fitness racing for 12 to 13 years. So it's been, I started in roughly 2012 timeframe with Spartan and Tough Mudder, doing obstacle course racing. And I've been doing that ever since, really. And it was kind of started mostly like just for fun, went out weekend warrior type thing with my friends. And we were like seniors in college at the time or juniors in college. And it was just like, hey, we found this cool thing. Let's go do it. And that's what we did. I grew up playing soccer. So like athletic and fitness was, always there. But once that was kind of over senior year, it was like, okay, now what? Right. Like I still had that kind of like competitive piece in my head. And to this day, I still have that. And it's just like, where can I push that outlet and where can I, push my body to do those athletic things and all of that. So it kind of evolved. And then the real, I'll say, switch flipped in around 2019. And I had signed up, maybe 2018, I had signed up kind of on a whim for an 8-hour race. And I had been like, okay, well, I hadn't done anything like this before. Just go see and find out what happens. And it ended up being, I took like 14th on like pretty minimal training and ran 40 miles in 8 hours. And,
oh my gosh.
So it was like, okay, well, I guess I'm like pretty decent at these things. Maybe I'll try this stuff. And like the following year I signed up for Spartan Ultra, ended up taking, I think, second place overall.
Wow.
And that was like my first elite podium, with that. And so, and that was a 50K, 30 plus miles. And then that transitioned to more of even longer events where 12 hours overnight, 8 hours during the day, and then even more so World's Toughest Mudder, 24 hours plus, trying to cover, as many miles as possible in that time.
Right.
And so that's kind of the focus now after finding kind of that niche for myself is I like to do everything and my training kind of shows that, but that's kind of like my specialty, if you will, of like really long, grindy stuff that, you just kind of dig in and get moving for a long time.
Yeah. And that's something that when I think of you as an athlete, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the athlete that sometimes I wish I could be. I'm over here like doing like 15, 20 minute, like high intensity stuff. And I'm like, gosh, the mindset that it takes to do what you do, like you've had to work on that probably so much and dig so deep, not just physically, but mentally to get to where you're at. Is there like, I know you said there was a moment where like the switch flipped for you. Is there like a race specific moment where you can think of that was like, this is something that changed the trajectory for me. This is a mindset that's stuck with me ever since.
So I think probably that first elite podium was a big one for me. It was a Spartan Ultra in Dallas, Texas, and it was just kind of, I had trained specifically for it at that point, but there was it was interesting because I went out hard at the beginning and was leading for a while, went off course actually,
Oh,
and
geez.
was went from first to like 11th or something like that by the time I got back. And it was just like, well, there's still 20 miles left. Like, you never know what's going to happen. Might as well just keep on going. And in the ultras, there's like a transition area at the halfway point ish. And I got to transition in like seventh or something.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I've made up time. I have 15 or so miles left and let's keep pushing and kind of see what happens. And it was just like, find the next guy, keep kind of chugging along. And at one point I thought I was going for third. I saw the guy in the distance, and, after 25 miles or whatever, my mentality was just like,
Yeah.
just keep going. Like, I had no like capacity to like think about things. So it was just, I think he's in third. I'm going to try to catch him. And I went, and we had roughly a half mile left, maybe a little bit more than that. And he like was going over a wall, like turned around and saw me like 100 yards behind him.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I
That
like
moment.
saw him like pick up his pace. And I was like, okay, we're racing now. Like, and so I tried to pick up my pace, and at one point, like, I caught him going over like one of the slip walls, and so I came over the top, and he starts sprinting. I start sprinting. There's maybe a quarter mile left in this 31-mile race, and we're in a full sprint going through obstacles at this
Wow.
point. And we got the barbed wire crawl, and I slid under like full in like soccer slide, trying to go under the barbed wire crawl. Got like halfway through, did a couple rolls, got up, went going, and there was the Hercules hoist, the spear throw, and then the fire jump to finish. And I got to the spear, like calmed myself down, hit the spear, and he hit it, but I took off so hard, and he was just like, I heard him audibly go, "This is your race." And at that point, I was like, holy shit. Like, like that flipped it for me, where it was like, I can grind for so long and still have
Yeah.
something left in the tank, that this is the stuff that I want to do. I want to just not break people, but like get to that point where it's like, I know I can keep going. And so that like mentality switch like really clicked in at that point for me.
Oh, I love that. I have goosebumps because I think the thing that just came out for me was like in that moment where you were like, holy crap, I just went from like first to 11th.
Yeah.
You can only focus on the step that you're on. And we get so wrapped up in these race feelings of focusing on the outcome of where we
Mm-hmm.
want to end up that we forget about the step that we're on, and
Yep.
how that like changes our mindset and raises our heart rate and just puts us in that space that's no longer productive. It's crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's just such a good reminder of just like, you might have this perfect race strategy and then all of a sudden something totally takes you off course, literally, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you have to be able to put yourself back into that space to just say, I got to focus on this present moment with the step that I'm on. And then before you know it, you're picking people off left and right. And
Yeah.
you're doing things and showing yourself that you're capable of more than had you not gone off course. And what a gift that is, right? Like the lessons you learn and all that you gain from that. So that's just incredible. So, one thing that we were also talking about when we were planning the show is that I love to just be organic in this and talk about like things that are going on in life and the lessons that you personally really like to share, want people to hear. And so you mentioned that you were having a conversation with some of our team members on the
Mhm.
Underdog fitness team about just things going on in life, I assume. And you said to them,
Respond calmly, don't react emotionally.
yeah, can you tell me more about that conversation and just what that meant?
Yeah. So I guess I'll preface this with, I do a lot of running, clearly. Um, and on most of my like easy and like long runs that are relatively chill from a heart rate perspective and like pace perspective, I listen to a ton of podcasts. So I try to take something from pretty much every podcast that I listen to, whether it's a training piece or a method or like mentality, advice or something like that, and try to apply it like to everything that I'm doing. Um, and so this came from a podcast that I was listening to, and at the time they were talking about racing and those types of things. But when I heard it, it stuck with me kind of holistically.
Yeah.
And so it was like when I heard, I was like, oh, okay. And even back to like the race that we were just talking about, it was like, okay, I went off course. I could have been pissed and I could have just been like, well, today's done, like whatever. And that's the emotional reaction to it, right? But instead, you take that second, you evaluate the situation, you respond calmly, and just go, all right, here's the decision I'm going to make based on what just happened, and we're going to proceed forward, and whatever happens from there happens, right? And so I wanted to just, we were going into kind of some early races for the Underdog team, and I wanted to just kind of get that out there for them that like in a race, like something weird might happen, right? There might be a competitor that's right next to you and they might surge for no reason. And you're like, well, I had this plan to like keep this pace. And do
Mhm.
I, do I go with them or do I stay and do my plan? Like, and for all you know, they're going to blow up in 3 minutes when they get to whatever station is next or whatever, and you're going to blow by them, right? If you stick to your plan. But if you react emotionally to that, like, oh, they're going faster, I need to go faster, you might blow up in a station too, and then your race is out the window. And so it was more just kind of along those lines of, don't necessarily go, oh my gosh, I need to do something right now. It's okay, they took off. Do I feel good? Can I make a real rational decision in this moment to say, okay, I feel good. I can go with them and I know I'm going to be okay. Or I'm going to take a risk and see what happens. And you're okay with the outcome if it's I'm going to blow up and then I blew up, right? Or I'm going to learn something from this decision that I made and move forward with my training or the next race or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think outcomes really do get the best of us
Mm-hmm.
because we take that one singular moment and we measure ourselves, or we measure our worth, all of our effort based off of that. How have you started to overcome that? Because like I know for me personally, like doing these huge race weekends, we're like, oh, I want to go set the world record. I want to do all these things. And sometimes it doesn't roll that way, you
Yeah.
know? And so, like, I imagine that you've had those similar feelings before where you've set this big expectation and didn't pan out that way. What are some things that have helped you overcome that?
Yeah, and I think it's for me, it's been almost a complete mindset shift going into races
Yeah.
of what my expectation of the race is going to be. I mean, obviously, I go into races, I want to win, right? I want to take a podium spot, all of that. Like the competitiveness is there for sure, but I've kind of changed that as to be more of a, I'll say a secondary goal. Like if it happens, awesome, right? I'm super happy that I got first, second, third, whatever, right? But the main goal now, especially with these longer distance races, is just empty the tank. Like if I go out there and I literally come across the line and I collapse because I have nothing left in my legs,
You
that's
did
a
it.
win for the day. That's a win for that race. Like if that put me in 20th, okay, I empty the tank and it's a solid day, right? If it put me in first, even better, right? That, and then I get that, I'll say glory of like, yeah, I empty the tank and I got first place. But as long as I said, okay, this is the extent of what my body could do for this race or this day, then that's a happy medium for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just mentioned this on a recent podcast, but it's like you have to do the best with what you have in the tank for that specific day.
Yep.
And that's what you can do. I tell people that with training all the time, like all the athletes that I coach, it's like there's gonna be some days where you're super motivated, you got a really good night of sleep, you fueled
Yep.
properly, and you're firing on all cylinders. And then there's gonna be other days where it's like I have like 5%. Give 100% of that 5%, and that's the
Exactly.
best that you can do.
Yep.
And so it's really tough to remember that though at times. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even my world's toughest mutter from 2024 was this exact situation because it ended up that it was significantly hotter than I had been trained for and
oof.
much more humid. And so um, we found out some of this afterwards, but it ended up being my wife and my son had traveled down there with me, and he ended up being sick
Mm.
before the race. And so he ended up having, I think, hand, foot, and mouth and a combination of roseola. And so he was all over the place, had a fever, like all kind. He was miserable for like the 5 days leading up. So like my sleep was awful because he was up crying like most of the nights and all of this stuff. And it was just like, it is what it is. Like we're here. And we found out afterwards because we got home like the Wednesday after the race and I broke out in a rash. And so like
Mm.
I was probably had a fever during the race too. And I was fighting that on top of the conditions and everything. But 5 or so laps in, like I came to my crew and I was already like 30 minutes behind my pacing strategy for the race. And it was like,
Wow.
okay, like here we are. Like came in, tried to mentally switch and like change my shoes, that kind of stuff, to just try to like change something. And went out 5 more laps later, came back. I was like 2 hours behind pace or something at that point, and it
Wow.
was just like it was just bleeding time. And I came in and had like a real good cry with my pit crew at that point, and was
Yeah.
just like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. I can't keep my heart rate down, all this stuff. Like, and I wasn't running paces that were outside of my ability or anything like that. It was just my heart rate was pinned at like 165 in for a 24-hour race. That's just not sustainable. And so I came in and, I just said, like, I'm not in a good spot, but I'm not stopping, right? We're going to see what I can get out of this race. And I'm just going to keep on trucking and see where I can get to. And eventually through the night, I found and linked up with a couple of guys that were also semi struggling. And at one point, I think it was around, they kind of lifted me out of this hole a little bit.
Yeah.
And they said, like, all right, we're just going to stick together. We're going to see what we can do. And, walk when we need to, run when we can, and do the obstacles, help each other, all that stuff. And it was roughly like 70 or 75 miles. I came into the pit and Kevin was there in pit crewing for me.
Yeah.
And he just said to me, do you want to keep doing what you're doing or do you want to go hunting? And I was like, okay, tell me, talk to me.
Ah,
And so he's like, there's a guy that's about 3 minutes ahead of you. Go catch him. And I was like, okay. And so like restocked my pack, took off going. Came back the next lap. He was like, next guy's about 5 minutes ahead. Go get him. And we did that for the next 5 laps. And it switched the mindset for me from I'm nowhere near the goal that I had originally set for myself. And there's no chance of me hitting that to the goal is go find one guy, come back, do it again, come back, find two guys, come back, do it again. And that like switch that he helped me do got me through the rest of that race. And I ended up doing 100 miles and a subpar performance for what my fitness I thought could have gotten me in that race, which is just like I left everything. I got the most out of my ability on that day, but it was just the mindset of it's not about the distance and the time and all of that stuff. It's just find a goal, go get the small goal, go get the next thing, go get the next thing. And eventually you'll get to the finish and you'll be happy with the performance, even if the performance wasn't your original planned performance.
which is so crazy for me to hear because we were all tracking on, we're all in WhatsApp in the group chat,
Yeah.
like, oh my God, he's doing so well. And like, I had no idea that that's how you're feeling. And what
Yep.
comes out to me in this experience is the power of vulnerability. The
Mhm.
fact that you got vulnerable, you had the cry sesh with your pit crew, and you told people, I'm struggling and I'm not where I'm at, opened you up to receive the help that you ultimately needed in that moment.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something else to remember too, is like, we can't do this alone. We
No.
just can't. Like, we have to invite other people along on the journey with us to do it. And like, when Kevin told you that, I would have been like, oh, heck yeah, I'm going hunting. I love hunting. That's my
Yeah.
favorite. Hate being hunted, but I love to hunt. And so like how wonderful that was for you to step into your vulnerability to get that help that you needed from the people that you needed to hear it most. And then 100 freaking miles. Like how many
Yeah.
people in that race actually achieve that?
So there were in that specific race, there were 9 total, and I was the last one.
And how
So
many people race total?
it was like 500 or something like that in that range.
That's incredible. Like,
Yeah.
amazing. So, hats off to you and just like
Thank
the
you.
mental switch that you had to go through. But again, like I said, just inviting other people along on the
Yeah.
journey with you.
Yeah. I couldn't
And
have done it
so,
without him. Absolutely.
no, absolutely not. And so you said that your wife and kiddo was also out there too?
They were, yeah. They came for like the beginning portion. So the race started at like 1 p.m. And so they were there for, and it was hot, but they were there for probably until like 5 or so, went home or went back to Airbnb and then came back in the morning to cheer on with at the finish and all that. So they were there at the finish line when I finished the last lap, and it was a pretty
That's
cool moment.
that's the best finish in the entire
Yeah.
world, like having those people standing there. I admire that so much of just how like you're fitting your family into this. And I have to imagine too, when you're training for these races, it's big volume. It's a lot of
Oh yeah.
commitment. You fulfill the role of being, you have a career, you are a
Mhm.
dad, you're a husband, you're doing all these different things on top of your training. How in the world do you juggle it all?
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, the something that I've used very regularly, and Kevin actually talked about this on some of our underdog team calls. Is lay out your priority list and
Mhm.
what are the things that are most important to you, and then next to that, it's how much time are you putting to each of those things? Do those two things match up or not? Right? And I use that very regularly, especially as training volume goes up. Right? Because my time allotted to training obviously goes up if the volume is going up. And so there's some non-negotiables in there. Like I work a typical 8 to 5 job. I'm an engineer. Like, so there's time that goes into that. Like I can't change that
Mhm.
time. Right. So that's 100%. I have to be there during that time. So what outside time do I have? And where do I want that time to go? So if like I bring my son to daycare at 8 a.m. and then I come back and I work until 5. My wife picks him up. And at that point, that's when my workday stops. And as soon as they get home, that the rest of the evening is with them. And so
Mm.
you notice I didn't say anything about training there, right? Because my training happens extremely early in the morning because that's when I have allotted that time so that I can spend the evenings with them. And I want to spend the evenings with him. I want to see him grow and him learn and all these things. I want to be part of playing with, Legos and magnet tiles and
Mm.
all these things with him, and spend dinner with my wife and him and eat at the little tiny baby table with him and like all that stuff, right? And so like the time that I have to commit to training is super early. And I don't want this to go like, oh, I get up super early, like I'm better than everyone, because that's not what this is. That's
Mm-mm.
just the time that I have. And I get up very early and I try to get at least a majority of my training done before my son even wakes up. And so if I can do that, and if I can have 85% of my training done, and he gets up in the morning and he's eating breakfast, and 50% of the time he'll come down. I have a basement gym, which is super helpful for the
Yeah.
situation, but like he can come down, he hangs out with me while I'm lifting sometimes, and all that stuff, and it allows me to spend as much time training as I need to, but also I'm still in the same space as my son, the same space as my wife, and allotting the appropriate amount of time and relationship time to those two as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like taking a deep dive into this current season of life, like you said, seeing what's most
Absolutely.
important, but also realizing that what might be important now might be the same, or what was important then might be the same now.
Yeah.
But again, the circumstances are completely
Hmm.
different. And like how you were able to show up in the last season of life is not the same anymore. And
Yep.
so that's okay. You're not failing, you're not doing anything wrong. We just have to adapt to the circumstances that are
Exactly.
now. And so yeah, I think that that's a wonderful way to try and navigate it. And just even to like your son getting to see you work out and
Yeah.
build your strength, right? Like can't forget the role model part of this
Yeah.
too, of like those moments are just as special for you and for him.
Yeah.
And so just like not everything's going to look perfect from day to day, and that's okay.
Hmm.
But the fact that you're still showing up in some capacity and you're bringing people along for the ride, and it's still, again, adjusting your priorities based off of the season of life, like that's the best that you can do in any circumstance.
Absolutely. It's really funny too because obviously he doesn't know what's happening. He's only 2, right? Like he sees me get ready in the morning and all this stuff, and especially on the weekends. and he sees me come back and like I'm in all my gear, right? Because I'm in upstate New York. It's cold. It's snowing. Like
Yeah.
I'm outside. I come back covered in ice and like, and he's like, "Did I just snow on his face?" And I'm like, "Yep, I do." And he goes to daycare, and the one of the daycare teachers the other day said to me, "Do you run a lot?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And she was like, "Oh, he, randomly just goes, 'Daddy's running.'" And I was like, "Oh gosh, this is awesome."
Love that. I
It's
had
so
a
funny.
moment with my niece. This is one of my favorite moments that I've had with my niece where she came and she's 2, she's going to turn 3 in June. So they're in
Okay.
that really fun
Yep.
phase right
Yep.
now where they just are like a sponge. But she was watching me do like a barbell event. And like when I got done, she had just got done watching the men do the barbell event. But when I got done, I came over and she picked up like a 2-pound weight and like pushed it over her head and goes, "Arr!" And I'm like, man, these kids are smart. And that was adorable, but man, these kids are smart. And like
Oh
how
yeah.
awesome it is that we get to like show them the way a little
Yep.
bit. So I think
Exactly.
that that's awesome. That's so wonderful. Well, I have one more main question for you. This show is obviously called Becoming Your Strong.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I find beautiful about strength is that it looks different for everyone. We
Yeah.
all have our own version of it, and it's for us to figure out what that is and step into it every day. And so I make this show a lot about like overcoming the different obstacles and again, stepping into that version of strong that we've identified for ourselves. And so for the listeners, what is your version of strong? Like, what does it look like and mean to you?
So I think there's a lot of different directions you can go. I think the easiest, when we're in our space, is to talk about like pure physical strength, right? Like
Yeah.
we're pushing sleds and we're pulling on ski ergs and we're doing all these things, right? And there's some physical component to all of that. Um, I think that's, I'll say, an easy route to go down, but from like a mental strength capacity, I think it gets broken down really into like three groups. And so there's like mental grit, there's mental like consistency, or something like that,
Yeah.
where and then there's mental resiliency. And so like when I break those things down, or consistency and commitment to me are kind of unanimous, but like mental grit is like you're in the thing, you're doing it, can you keep going? There's some component to that in everything that we're doing, whether it's a 5-minute workout or a 24-hour workout, right? And so that the ability to just kind of keep going, right? And then from a mental commitment or consistency standpoint, it's, are you showing up the way that you want to show up? Are
Mm.
you able to say, okay, like I've said I want this plan, I have this goal. Are you mentally able to say, okay, I'm going to plan for it, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do the thing that I want to do? And obviously this comes with all the priorities and things that we're talking about. But the ability to say, yes, I'm committed to, mentally and emotionally, physically, I'm committed to the thing that I want to go achieve. And then thirdly, mental resiliency, which is when something doesn't go the way that you want it to go, how do you respond mentally to that? Is it something where it's, oh, geez, I'm done, I can't do this anymore? Or is it, okay, well, I missed a lift, or I didn't hit the pace I wanted to on that workout, but was it something I did? Was it, did I only get 4 hours of sleep last night? How do you evaluate the situation? How do you bounce back to the next session and go, okay, last session didn't go exactly how I wanted. Let's see what we can do today. Right. And I think all three of those for me can be built differently,
Yeah.
and they don't all go hand in hand either. And so somebody might be really good at the, in the moment I can do it, but they suck at the commitment part. And so they need to focus on that to say, okay, how do I'm good when I'm there. Maybe I need a buddy to come help me on the commitment piece of things, to help me build that strength mentally, and even resiliency, right? Like we're all competitive people. We get down when the result doesn't go the way that we want it to. But do you have that second set of eyes or something to kind of help you take a look at it from a different lens, to say, even AJ, like he and I have had a lot of conversations about, hey, like he comes off the finish line and he's down. He's like, oh, I missed my PR by 35 seconds. I'm like, yeah, but the course sucked. And like, you beat the 7 other guys that beat you earlier in the year. So, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. Like,
Yeah.
and like that ability to reframe the viewpoint and the mindset, I think is huge for, a ton of people, everyone really.
Yeah, I love that you break it down into 3 different components too of, like, how are you doing in all 3 of them, and I think it also goes to show too that there's gonna be times where, like, you don't react or you don't
Yeah.
think or you don't reframe in the way that you want to. Like, I had this moment after, like, a CrossFit competition one weekend, and I was like, "I didn't show up in the way that I liked." Like,
Hmm.
that wasn't kosher for me, but at least I'm able to reflect and recognize that and
Yep.
then make moves to be better for the future. And so I think for the listeners, it's not about, again, the perfection of always showing up in like this way. Like you're going to go through some moments and they're going to be rough city, and that's okay. Like it's the fact that
Exactly.
you're able to see it, call yourself out, and then move forward from it.
Hmm. For
Yeah.
sure.
Awesome. Is there any last things, any last nuggets that you want to leave the listeners with?
I just go have fun. Like, to me, that's the biggest thing is whatever the goal or whatever the thing is that you like to do, just go do it and have a good time. If the result doesn't happen exactly how you want it to, no big deal. Like, we're doing this stuff because we like to and because we can. And I think that's the privilege of it all. And we're here to have a good time. And so find a buddy, find somebody to do it with you if you want, and just go have fun.
Yeah. Never forget to chase those moments of joy, right?
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Joe, so much for coming on the podcast. I'm sure we'll have you again at some point. But
I would love to.
yes, yes, yes. Thank you again so much, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.